Welcome to episode 2 of Ask the Experts. In this episode, I talked to Dr. David Ludwig about fats. Dr. Ludwig, for a long time, people were taught that eating fats are bad for their health. You have a radically different view on this topic. In your opinion, is eating fat good for you?
Sure. Well, our basic premise, which is supported by decades of work in my laboratory, but also by hundreds of studies from groups around the country and research dating back decades, if not a century. The basic premise is that that body weight is caused by biological changes that lead fat cells to grab onto too many calories, to suck up too many calories and hold on to them. And so instead of there being too many calories in the bloodstream, which is how the conventional model holds things. We overeat, calories build up in the bloodstream and then get forced into storage in fat cells. But by this other way of thinking about it, the problem is primarily with the fat cells. They get driven into calorie storage overdrive, put into calorie storage overdrive. They suck up too many calories, and so there are too few calories in the bloodstream. Not enough glucose and other calorie-rich substances. And so the brain perceives that as an energy crisis. That's why we get hungry. And if we ignore our hunger, that's why our metabolism slows down and it's so difficult to keep losing weight. So what could be driving fat cells into this feeding frenzy? Well, the obvious player is too much of the hormone insulin. This is just endocrinology 101. I call insulin the ultimate fat cell fertilizer. Fat cells cannot store calories unless directed to do so by insulin. So you get rid of all of these processed carbohydrates and all of the carbohydrates that have what's called a high glycemic load. They digest into sugar and raise insulin. We get rid of all of those for 2 weeks to let your hormones and metabolism settle down to begin that process of shifting into a weight loss metabolic state. And then phase 2, which you stay in as long as you continue to lose weight to your new sort of lower body weight set point, adds back unprocessed grains. So we're not talking about brown breads that might say that they're whole grain, but they're still highly processed. You can kind of roll them up into a little ball, drop them, and they bounce. We're talking about real minimally processed, unprocessed grains. So brown rice, steel-cut oats, pearl barley, quinoa, and then there are a variety of old world grains, other more exotic grains that people like teff, which are delicious and a little slower digesting, very nutritious. So we add those back in phase 2, and then in phase 3, we let people experiment a little bit with the processed grains, breads, maybe even a little dessert. But it's critical to recognize that people vary in their capacity to handle these foods. 100 years ago, it was common knowledge, a common sense among the general public that it was the processed carbohydrates, the starches and sugars that made you fat. And that, the teaching, if you wanted to lose weight, you watched the pasta and the bread and the potatoes. And that changed with the low-fat era, in the 1970s, when initially people were advised to cut back on saturated fat because of the concern of its link to heart disease. But that message quickly generalized to, if you don't want fat on your body, don't put fat into your body. And it was based on very weak science. We now know that there is no relationship between dietary fat and body fat. That the people eating the most amounts of fat in the United States are no heavier than the people eating the least amounts, and that some of the highest fat foods we have, like nuts, olive oil, full-fat dairy, dark chocolate, are among the most health-protecting, not only preventing weight gain, but also protecting against diabetes, heart disease, and cognitive decline. Remember, the brain is mostly fat, and these high-fat foods in their natural state are full of antioxidants and phytochemicals they don't raise insulin levels, and they provide a very good, satisfying alternative to the processed carbohydrate. We ultimately do have to have what's called a negative energy balance to lose weight. You know, fat is a rich store of energy, actually very prized in history, because having some excess fat would help you survive a famine or help you survive an illness. But that rich store of calories has to be depleted if you're going to lose weight, if you're going to become less fat. The question is, which comes first, the overeating or the process of becoming obese? And I think we've reversed that with really unfortunate consequences to the success of obesity treatment. Let's think about it this way. Most people, overeat because they're hungry. And if you cut back calories, what happens to hunger? It's going to increase ever more. So are we supposed to live the rest of our lives with that battle between mind and metabolism? An alternative way of approaching this is not to focus on calorie restriction, but instead think about ways of eating that decrease hunger and support metabolism. Then your calorie intake drops naturally without that ongoing conflict between mind and metabolism. If we figure out a way to lower that body weight set point, that whatever has been, we'll talk more about this, pushing body weight up, if we reverse that and we lower the body weight set point, then our hunger naturally declines, our metabolism speeds up, and we lose weight naturally. So yes, it is critical to have a negative calorie balance, but the key question is, how do we get there? Through deprivation or taking advantage of our biology to make the process easy.